Global higher education is the founding point for change in any education system. Having the right academics in the right places, making the right decisions, feeds into the curriculum that we see in the classroom for small children all the way to adult learners. What is clear is that in higher education, having the right structure and the right staff in base with the right motivations matters. And even in the most developed countries, such as the UK, there's been a struggle in recent years in getting academic staff to understand that their teaching role is as important to society as that of their research. If we want to change the education system, we have to be willing and able to do that. And we have to buy in the stakeholders that hold the keys to education. From my own experience working with countries around the world, that there are opportunities to change things in higher education. In Georgia, the university can only offer degrees that are offered by law. And so innovations such as the professional doctorates that they wish to enact in Georgia cannot happen without changes in the legal framework. In that context, any willingness to change in higher education has to come from an understanding of the context in which that happens. And even drives from the universities cannot happen without support of national governments. And the Georgian example is an extreme example of that kind of constraint held by national government. But we also see in countries like in the Lebanon, where many of the institutions are private sector institutions, that government policies on their own are ineffective. What do we mean by that? Is that in the world, in higher education as a whole, quality assurance processes have been a dominant theme, say since 2010, and yet still some institutions in some parts of the world will try to avoid taking part in these initiatives. Countries like Singapore, which have had rapid development in all levels of education, we see changes even in the higher education system. Within the Singaporean system, we've seen a development of professional doctorates, promoting the link between the private sector and the universities. That establishment and creation and importance of the stakeholders in higher education has changed the way that practice is delivered, and in its turn develops different graduates who then offer different opportunities in the labour market, not just in the private sector but in other sectors such as health and education itself. So if we're looking to enact change in education system as a whole, we have to start with change in higher education, because higher education models that teaching practice that then rolls on to the teaching practice of the children in the classroom. If we're looking to change society, and yet our higher education systems are very based in the private sector, it's clear that it will be difficult to enact change through a higher education initiative. And that brings to play a whole range of conversations around the relationship between the state and its way that it enacts policy to make good higher education, and who's providing that higher education, whether it's a state university or a private sector institution. In either case, change cannot happen just at the institution level and must be enacted in the people who operate in the system. And a willingness to change has to be right across the education system, down to the nursery teacher in her classroom and her willingness to enact some play-based learning, all the way up to the Vice Chancellor of a university being willing to take something of a risk by offering that subject that might just make a difference in 20 years' time in the labour market. Of course, in addition to any staff base, there's only so much staff can do, and being supported by the right classroom environment and the right resources is an expensive part of any educational redevelopment. One big part of this component is the use of technology in the classroom, and the use of technology in the classroom is not restricted to the presentation of PowerPoint slides, but can be used in many and various ways to enhance a teacher's practice and the experience of the students. Any form of use of technology needs a sound investment in infrastructure, and that infrastructure is not just the hardware in the classroom, Wi-Fi networks and other supportive devices, and these need strategic planning and strategic management, and exists therefore a role for government in deciding and thinking about planning those resources. With a basic infrastructure in an education establishment, it's now not going to take off without effective training of staff. Staff need to know how to use these resources, not just to turn them on and off, but on how to promote and improve their practice. And in that practice, therefore, the experience of their students in learning. One of the things that we know throughout the world and that we've seen is that young kids today understand technology in a much greater way than maybe we do ourselves. And so the designing of any technology can also be student-led. Even the smallest child now will know how to get an iPad to play a game that it likes. And in fact, one of the roles of a teacher in this modern classroom environment is to identify those apps which can not only provide fun, but provide a learning experience for the child beyond the walls of the classroom. Globally, there's a drive to make education better, to develop ourselves and to develop those who will lead us in the future. And within the many regions of the world, like the Middle East, there are governments striving to help the young generation of the future cope with the uncertainties that will exist and to be able to lead in the future. One example of that strategy would be the Vision 2030. And within Saudi Arabia's vision, we see that there's a potential to really change and make change, but this won't be rapid. But what's also clear is the factors to enact that change will evolve around the topics that we've been discussing. Firstly, that in order to make educational experiences better, we need better quality educational staff. And teacher training should be at the heart of any redevelopment of an education system. On top of that, the world has changed immensely since the internet revolution in the 1980s. And those technology developments continue at an ever-increasing pace, not just in our lives, but also in the lives of the classroom and the classroom experience. That investment in infrastructure and investment in teaching teachers to use that infrastructure will be an important part of developing the next generation of future leaders and ensuring that they have the skills to be able to succeed in an ever-increasingly uncertain world.